This is Keith Kreischer. I'm the Executive Director of the IoT M2M Council, and it is my pleasure to welcome you all to this third track of the IMC's IoT Days summer event, presented by the IMC, of course. The topic for this track is licensed versus unlicensed spectrum. And you can see the full schedule for the entire event in the resources section of your interface. Before we begin, we want to cover a few housekeeping items. At the bottom of your screen are multiple application widgets that you can use. All the widgets are resizable and movable, so feel free to move them around to get the most out of your desktop space. You can expand your slide area or maximize it to full screen by clicking on the arrows in the top right corner. Those are those little arrows in the box at the top right. This webcast is being streamed through your computer, so there is no dial-in number. For the best audio quality, please make sure your computer speakers or headset are turned on and the volume is up so you can hear the presenter. If your slides are delayed, pushing F5 on your keyboard will refresh the page. You can find additional answers to some common technical issues in the Help widget at the bottom of your screen. An on-demand version of this webcast will be made available later today and can be accessed using the same audience link that was sent to you earlier. If you have any questions during the webcast, you can submit them through the Q&A widget. The presenters may answer the questions at the end of each session, but please feel free to ask the questions at any time during the presentations. Any unanswered questions will be responded to offline. Once again, we welcome our audience and our speakers and hope that everyone is staying safe and well in these interesting times. Once again, I'm Keith Kreischer, the Executive Director of the IMC, and I'm going to introduce our first speaker, Fernando Baena of Peyton, in just a moment. But first, I'd like to also say a quick word about the IMC for those on the call that may not know us. The IMC is a trade association formed in 2014 by an eclectic group of influential IoT solutions providers, a combination of big telcos, MVNOs, providers of software and hardware, and a very widespread and influential group. The consensus among our group from the very start has been that we did not want to be a technical standards body or a testbed group. There are plenty of good people working those issues, and they are important. But we wanted to find out more about people that buy IoT stuff. And by that I mean enterprise users, product makers and designers, apps developers that buy IoT solutions to deploy embedded devices in the field. What did these people look like? What did they need? How could we help them? So we started an outreach program based on content and in exchange for content, asking for their participation. And that outreach effort was more successful than we ever could have hoped. The IMC today has over 25,000 adopter members, we call them. They cover 27 different vertical markets, everything from automotive manufacturing to precision agriculture to retail point of sale. Roughly 35% come from North America, 25% from Europe, and 25% from Asia. We do curate our roles to keep them around 25,000, and we look at these IMC adopter membership roles as the largest market segmentation study ever done for the IoT sector. The mission of the IMC is to accelerate the adoption of IoT technology for the public good. And we look at this track today on licensed versus unlicensed spectrum as exactly in keeping with that mission. Before I introduce Fernando, I would like to remind and encourage everyone in the audience to put forward your questions at any time during the presentations. We may hold your questions until the end so that we can present them verbally and give the entire audience the benefit of the answers. If we don't get to your question, never fear. Our speakers will have a copy of your question and your registration details and be able to address those offline. One last point. Full biographies for each and every one of our speakers and moderators today is available in the resource section of your interface. So we tend to keep the introductions short and sweet. And with that, I'd like to introduce our first speaker, who is Fernando Baena of Peyton. He's the head of IoT sales for enterprise. Fernando, good afternoon and welcome.
Hello. Good afternoon. Thanks to the IMC, Rula, and Keith for having me today. So, I mean, I'm glad to be part of this panel, of this session. Just a quick disclaimer. Myself, I work for BIG, so we are a company specialized in cellular connectivity. But today, most of the ideas, the topics that are always my point of view may not be linked to my activity at BIGS, but I'm trying, as Keith and Rula asked me, to contribute to the session and trying to leverage some of the experience I got working in IoT for the last year in many different fields and technologies. So having said that, just to organize and to set up this quick introduction, I have listed on the left side some of the criteria that are the mostly asked by companies when they start to think or design an IoT solution. They always think about the coverage, the OPEX, the CAPEX, the bandwidth, energy consumption from different aspects. You can imagine the constraints of a CFO are not the same constraints of an engineer, but after all those topics define which kind of technology you can or you want to use. And on the right side, I have listed by its logo the most relevant technologies for both licensed and unlicensed spectrum. From LoRaWAN, Sigfox, which are, let's say, the most known in terms of unlicensed, to other licenses one, which are like the NB-IoT, Ltem, and satellite. And then in the middle, well, some of the questions that I'm going to use to structure the keynote, and that I hope can bring some clarity, or at least can bring the people to ask themselves more questions, or the right questions when they start to develop and to put in place their IoT services. So starting with what is the question? What technology, in what case, if we address this from the coverage perspective? Well, when it comes to coverage, there are several dimensions that are going to drive us towards the different technologies. If you want to deploy at national level, you can go for an unlicensed technology like Sigfox or LoRa. They present a very good coverage in specific countries, specific cities, specific areas, and they are already proven that they are simple and they do the work in terms of national or limited area deployments. From my experience, when we want to address a worldwide coverage, it's more likely that the companies, they take the decision or they ask much more questions about licensed technologies. Because, well, somehow they guarantee a technical homogeneity. And as we will say afterwards, sometimes companies who want to deploy IoT services, they feel more comfortable working with CSPs or knowing that a CSP is the one backing the technology. But still, a caveat on that is that for certain technologies like NB-IoT and Ltem, well, the coverage at international scale is still work in progress. And I think that some of my colleagues will discuss this later on. It's something that you need to consider, you need to take into account when doing your design. Of course, when choosing between licensed and unlicensed, a key topic, especially for the manufacturing part, is that you need to be able ideally to run with a single SKU, with a single reference for all your projects. So that's why today the licensed technologies, when they will be fully deployed, they guarantee you that, well, a single device, a single hardware setup will work in the different countries and will be able to cope with your worldwide deployments. When it comes to OPEX, CAPEX, again, there are different dimensions to analyze, from the hardware cost, the subscription, the maintenance. For me, in my experience, the unlicensed technology, they had a huge advantage, let's say, in the 1-2 years before, both in terms of the device and the subscription cost. It's mostly because those unlicensed technologies, like Sigfox and LoRa, they are by design quite simple. So the cost itself of the device and the cost of the deployments were not that high. Since 1 or 2 years, what we are seeing is that this is changing. The silicon suppliers, where they are ramping up the volumes in terms of the licensed technologies for NB-IoT, Ltem, decreasing the bill of material, the total cost of the hardware. And then in parallel, the other player in this equation, which are the communication service providers, where they are pushing to the market very compelling price offers with, for example, today you can buy an NB-IoT monthly subscription for less than €1. It's still, let's say, expensive when we are talking about the billions of devices that all of us want to see live. But again, it's just the beginning. And as we will see later, one of the things that, of course, those prices will go down. Another topic to consider when comparing or trying to decide between licensed and unlicensed technology is the network maintenance. Here, again, the topic is quite complex. But for example, if you plan or if you need to deploy or subcontract a LoRaWAN for your IoT services, well, your business case needs to consider that there will be a cost of maintenance and a cost of building this network. Whereas if you go for an NB-IoT or satellite network, well, the cost of the deployment or the maintenance costs are already somehow included in the subscription cost. And the last point that I put in the slide is about the service maintenance. Here, let's say the difference is a little bit less relevant, but well, when those projects scale to the thousands of devices, keeping those devices updated in terms of firmware, in terms of managing their life cycle, can also become an interesting part of your cost structure. And then, of course, keeping the life cycle of a device who needs to receive firmware updates versus a device simple like a Sigfox or LoRa, which can be a disposable device, can also make a difference in terms of the total cost of ownership of the solution. In terms of bandwidth, well, I think here you have all the literature you need in the internet. But again, in this case, I think there is no many choices to be done. It will be your use case who will be the one defining which technology you can use. There is no technology that fits all, and I think I will repeat this at the end. And if it does, there will be some negative impacts in terms of cost or energy consumption. If you need today to use high bandwidth for your IoT use case, well, you need to go for licensed technologies like Ltem and 5G. If you need a low bandwidth, well, here you may have a choice, and you may have to do some trade-off. You can decide to use either a licensed technology like LoRa, a licensed technology like NB-IoT versus an unlicensed one like LoRa, because they may provide a similar services. And then, as I said before, the cost gap is becoming neglectable. So there is maybe some choices to be done. But again, the use case will drive with technology use. And of course, here a key point is also that the rule of keeping it simple also applies. If you have to choose between a licensed and unlicensed technology, and the total cost of ownership of the device, building it up and keeping it alive is lower, which is today is most of the times the case for unlicensed technology, those are the ones you should choose. And then if you have a use case where you really need an ultra low bandwidth, well, here, honestly, from a technical perspective, in my opinion, the unlicensed technologies are a good choice. They are simple and cheap. Again, as I said before, the licensed ones like NB-IoT and Ltem are catching up. But for really ultra low bandwidth use cases, I think that the unlicensed technology, they really do the trick and provide you what you need in terms of functionalities. And when it comes to energy consumption, again, you can find all kind of power analysis comparisons between the technologies over the internet. Well, here the energy consumption is the topic where you will have to make most of the trade-offs. Again, like for the bandwidth, the use case will impose what technology to use. Here, the unlicensed technologies like LoRaWAN and Sigfox, they have a key advantage thanks to its simplicity, because technically they are simple solutions, but of course they quickly reach their limits in terms of bandwidth. On the other side, the licensed technologies like NB-IoT, Ltem, they are also getting to a situation in which their energy requirements are getting smaller and smaller. They have some features that I will just mention later on, like power-saving modes, that making them more and more compatible with the unlicensed one, and of course need to be considered. The only point with those new power-saving, let's call it, features, is that, well, they need to be supported both at the network and the device side. And well, as I said before, network support of licensed technologies like NB-IoT and Ltem is something that is taking time. The CSPs, they are deploying, but it's not something that will be available from day one. And then if we move to the second question, which regards more like kind of, let's say, the future-proofness, again, I don't have a crystal ball, but I have to say that, well, today, most of the customers with whom we work, the problem is that they are going to put on the field a lot of devices that they need to keep alive for a longer amount of time. And, well, the choices that take now, in many cases, they are irrevocable. They will not be able to come back. Let's say, starting with the coverage, the licensed technologies, what most of our customers are telling us is that in their feelings, they are usually here to stay. Again, the point here is that if you are talking about a specific country, maybe a CSP, the plans they have to deploy or to improve the coverage, they don't fit your needs in terms of coverage. Some of our customers, they say, well, I have the impression the coverage follows the population. It doesn't follow my things. They don't follow the items that I need to communicate. Well, that's something that we have to manage. I mean, customers need to manage because, well, we cannot do too much to steer the coverage plans of the CSPs. For the unlicensed ones, it could also be the case that the coverage may simply doesn't match your needs. In this case, you can deploy some of them in private mode, like LoRaWAN, but of course, it will have an impact in terms of your OPEX and CAPEX. I have to say, and I'm really, I mean, as a, let's say, an external observer of this market, I'm very glad to see that there are some unlicensed technologies like LoRaWAN, which are getting really worldwide deployments. I recently saw some announcements in the US, and this is something that is very encouraging because in terms of future improvements, well, it seems for our customers that they can engage with these kind of technologies, being assured that the technologies will be there to stay. In terms of future proofness for the OPEX and CAPEX part, well, going for a licensed technology will certainly guarantee a certain, let's say, choice in terms of supplier, and there will be competition. Competition in licensed technology will be there, and there will be cost, that will go down with time. The other thing is that, well, with the unlicensed technologies, somehow, and again, there are always caveats to this statement, you are at the mercy of the network supplier. There will be no real competition. If you make the choice of working with 6.4 LoRa or other unlicensed technology, if you only have a network supplier, well, somehow your destinies are tied in this respect. There is also a positive side on that in the sense that, well, the cost structure of an unlicensed network usually are lower than those of a classic communication service providers. But still there will be no, it's a real competition when you are dealing with a single network provider in a single country. So this is something that needs to be managed from a future-proofness perspective. And then, in terms of bandwidth, well, at first sight, it may look like, okay, this is not gonna change. But let's say that for licensed technologies, you can expect improvements in the sense that, well, the coverage will improve with time, and this is something that certain customers, well, they know there are some gaps in terms of coverage, but they know that they will be improved with time, because it's clear that for them the improvements in coverage will on one side improve the quality of their service. It can also improve the bandwidth, as we mentioned in this slide. But as I will see in the next slide, this will also help for the case of licensed technology to improve the power consumption, because by the technical design of those technologies, where the better coverage, the less energy that the device needs to use to communicate. For unlicensed technology, well, its basic simplicity also implies that, well, the bandwidth evolution remains fixed along the time. It can be or not an issue depending on your use case, but it's very likely that when you choose an unlicensed technology, your bandwidth needs will not need to evolve. And this is something that you need, again, to compute in your calculations when designing the service. And then from an energy consumption in terms of future proofness, well, that's something that, we are talking of course, as always, of devices that will be running on on battery power most of the time. Well, for license one, as I said before, there will be some features that are slowly being deployed by CSP that will allow to decrease the power consumption. And well, some of our customers, they say, well, I can launch them. Those features are supported by my device. Even if today they are not available in the network, maybe in 1 year time, I can make a firmware upgrade and then take profit of them. That's an approach. Of course, it implies that your use case allows you to have a device that is capable of receiving a remote firmware upgrade, and also you have all the systems to manage all those upgrades. For unlicensed one, well, those technologies, as I said from the very beginning, the basic design is simplicity. So there will be not much choices or not much changes in time when as time goes by in terms of the energy consumption. And then one last point, just to leave some place for Q&A about, let's say, the multi-technology approach. Again, here that's my from my personal experience. When you have modules or supplies that have multi-technology modules, where it's most of the time something that is for proof of concepts, developments that are at a limited scale or something like that. Still, there are some use cases in which a multi-technology approach could make sense. For example, some of the customers, they are using ultra-low bandwidth technologies. It can be LoRa, Sigfox, to add anti-tampering capabilities to its device. They want to be sure that whatever happens from a network energy perspective, they can always send an ultra-low, let's say, signal to detect that the device was open. But outside of that, and the other case I mentioned in the slide regarding some tracking and alerting, it's pretty difficult to match the size, cost, and energy consumption criteria. Even the antenna design, I mean, there may be some experts in the audience, but I think it's quite complicated also to put everything together in a single design. And also the programming, the lifetime of the device is very complicated if you want to put all those technologies working together in the same device. So that's let's say that's the slide, and hope there was a lot of information, but again the topic is huge, and I'm sure my colleagues afterward are gonna get into some more details. Hope the introduction was worthwhile for the audience.
Thanks so much, Fernando. Definitely worthwhile. I took a lot of notes, and as usual, I learned a few things. A couple of questions coming in, but to start with, talk to us about the different approaches to the unlicensed side of this equation. In order to get coverage, Sigfox took a fairly proprietary approach. LoRa did not. They work with partners. We're hearing a lot about LoRa partnerships right now, expanding coverage. Obviously, with the licensed side of the equation, you've already got the coverage in place. What are your thoughts on that? You did mention it in your talk, but could you expand on that a little bit?
Well, I think, it's basically it's also a question of business case. I think some of those companies, I'm a former Sigfox employee, so the business case is totally different, because you want to manage the network, the objects, and the data that transits through it. Again, this is, let's say, something that makes quite difficult to put those business case in the market. But on the other side, you are the owner of the technologies, so the simplicity theoretically helps to accelerate the growth of this market. LoRa right now, let's say, what I am reading in the news, what I follow in the market, is that they are, I cannot recall the name of the company, but there's a company that has recently announced, they are deploying nationally in the US. That's pretty amazing. Even if covering the US territory, let's say, it's so to say, at least it's a challenge. But going through the big cities and telling people, well, you have a network there that you can use, it's something that is really, really relevant for this kind of technology. And I think it's a fair competition and an interesting competition, if I can say, to the licensed technologies, right?
Right. Hey, we got stuff streaming in over the transom here from the audience, so I'm going to try to pick the questions in a order that flows. And we're pressed for time, obviously, but do what you can. In your view, Fernando, what are the estimated market shares of the technologies that you mentioned today, and where do you see those moving, say, 5 years from now?
Well, I mean, here, I'm not going to put some numbers, because if you are recording this and you don't quote me for the audience, I mean, not for you, Keith, but for the audience. Now, seriously, no, we see a lot of traction from the licensed technologies, from the simple reason that the cost and the efforts needed to put those kind of solutions into the market is dramatically decreasing. As simple as that. When companies need to choose and they need to strike a balance, this is weighing a lot. And step by step, not as fast as, especially in this case, my company would like, but the coverage for those new licensed technologies and the IoT, Ltem, 5G is getting there. So I would put, let's say, my bets on the licensed technology becoming the dominant player.
Right. Do you know anything, Fernando? This may be a better question for the panelists that are following, but do you know anything about the jamming resistance of Sigfox's solutions, which might make them a better choice for stolen vehicle tracking, for example?
For example, it's a very good question. I mean, something linked to the example I raised in my last slide. There are some use cases in which you say, okay, I want to make sure my signal will be transmitted even if I don't have the battery. A Sigfox or a LoRa signal, it's very difficult to jam, and you need very, very, very low energy to do it. So just to detect a 1-0, a binary situation in which a device is open or not, because it's a security device, is more than enough. And in this case, of course, those anti-jamming capabilities, especially Sigfox and LoRaWAN, make a lot of sense. But still, you need to add those capabilities to your device, which means you need to build in, you need to pay for them, you need to pay for the subscription. I mean, it all adds up, which at the end is what really prevents some deployments.
Right. Another good question here. You know, LTE-M, NB-IoT are really just getting started. I think most people would agree with that. Do we have 4G LTE and LTE-M hybrid solutions at this point?
Yes, we do. Chipset manufacturers and module makers, they are putting it there. For sure, there is, and again, there will be a transition here. Today, most of the modules that are used to build up the IoT devices, they need to combine different technologies. It may be counterintuitive, but okay, this is the status of the market. If you want to have a single reference for many countries, you need to put up many different technologies in the same device. But with time, I think I mentioned this in one of the slides, we are already starting to see NB-IoT only modules in the market, which of course will decrease the cost, the bill of material. But of course, it depends. I mean, it depends that you need to be sure that everywhere where you will deploy, there will be coverage for this technology, and you will not need a 2G fallback or a 4G fallback, etc. So yeah, it's moving in this direction.
Got it. And you know, a similar question here is does it make sense to have, you know, a mixed network of a sort of high bandwidth apps with unlicensed sensor-based network apps? Will we see that, and does it make sense?
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense, but here what is almost all the times bringing us to reality is when you want to deploy in the tens or in the hundreds of thousands. In this case, most of the times you need to make a choice. Either you go for a high bandwidth application because this is what you really need, and this is where because if not, the scale up, the volumes of the cost will in most of the cases make impossible to deploy two kind of, let's say, use cases at the same time. And this is what we are seeing in many real life deployments.
Right, right. Hey, last question. You know, we're up against it, but and this may be too much to ask because it's a big question. What about private LTE approaches for IoT use cases? That's a big subject, I know.
That's a big subject, but again, here it's starting to take serious shape with many companies deploying. Today we have use cases, for example, in hospital, factories, and some remote places where people are building private LTE networks. And again, this is linked to my current task at Biggs. They want to kind of roam into the licensed networks, because sometimes the devices, they get out of the coverage of the private network. So there are always use cases for that. And this is also becoming a reality. The good thing about that is that everything is private. Well, those companies deploying, they have the end-to-end control to that. They put in place the network, the devices, and the services. So somehow, in some cases, it can go faster, and you can really match your use case needs with the capabilities that the network will deliver.
Fernando, terrific stuff. Hey, and you got through most of those questions in a very short time with very, very efficient answers. I appreciate it. I appreciate it very much. Fernando Baena, Head of IoT Sales and Go-to-Market at Bix. Thanks so much for joining us this morning.
Thank you very much, Keith. Looking forward to seeing you soon. Thanks to the audience. Have a nice day.
Thank you so much. Take care. And with that, I will hand off to another good friend and colleague, Renal Paramel, who is a co-founder and senior partner at the Strategy of Things Group. Renal, good morning.
Good morning, Keith. Thank you for having me here.
Take us away. It's all yours.
Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be participating at this exciting event organized by IoT M2M Council. Thank you, Keith, Rula, David, and team for inviting me to this panel discussion on IoT connectivity, where we'll explore some aspects of licensed versus unlicensed connectivity technologies. Thank you all, audience, for joining us today, and we hope to make this session as informative as possible for you all. Let me start with a quick introduction about myself. My name is Renal Paramel. I'm a co-founder and senior partner at Strategy of Things. I'm based in Silicon Valley, California. Prior to starting Strategy of Things, I was a VP with Gartner, the research and consulting firm. And prior to that, I spent a number of years with Accenture and Deloitte, working across a number of industries. Relevant to our conversation today, my firm, Strategy of Things, co-authored the GCTC Municipal IoT Blueprint, where we wrote a chapter on how municipalities and cities should plan their IoT network to address smart city solution needs. I'm also working on a cooperative grant with Nist and U.S. Department of Commerce on identifying top IoT infrastructure gaps across 10 different industries. We are currently in year 2 of our study, and we'll be publishing some of our findings later this year. I'll share more information about that in a moment. We have 4 exciting panelists who have taken time out from their busy schedule to engage with us today. I'll do a quick introduction to you of the 4 panelists, and after that, I'll ask each of the panelists to do a short presentation about their company, as well as share any perspective they might have on the topic we're discussing today. And after that, we'll kick off the panel discussion with a series of questions. And audience out there, please feel free to post your questions. I saw some really terrific questions earlier today. Let's continue that momentum. And once we get to that stage, we'll ask our panelists some of these questions that you have for us today. So with that, our first panelist we have today is Landon Gardner. Landon is an SVP and Chief Marketing Officer at Core. Landon oversees all global marketing efforts for the company, along with key strategic initiatives. Prior to joining Core, Landon served as SVP of Marketing and Strategy at Integron and led the company to record growth. His experience and skills that allowed the company to identify and address connected health and life science industries with integrated IoT solutions. Landon has also served as multiple CMO and executive positions at various companies. He holds a bachelor's degree in marketing from Brigham Young University, Idaho, and an MBA from the University of Hawaii's Schiller College of Business. So welcome, Landon. Our second panelist is Tom Peyton. He's from Microsoft. Tom is a part of Microsoft's Azure IoT Business Acceleration team and focus on IoT connectivity and Azure IoT Central. Tom works with leading partners and marquee customers to define and deliver digital transformation solutions that harness the power of Microsoft Azure in combination with emerging technologies like 5G, edge computing, and LPWAN networks. Tom has been with Microsoft for 17 years with experience across the Microsoft Cloud, including Azure, developer tools, and business applications. Our third panelist is Marco Stracuzzi, who is the head of product marketing at Telit. He's responsible for product leadership, sales teams to execute on go-to-market strategies that drive global awareness and adoption of Telit's product and solutions. Marco identifies customer use cases, generates product specifications, and builds business cases for new products. He also synthesizes and analyzes the competitive landscape to drive Telit's future product strategy and roadmap. Marco started at Telit in 2012, and during this time, he has held various positions in project and product management. Before Telit, Marco was a technical trainer and professional service engineer with Kpis. Our fourth panelist is Jim Wirt, CTO and co-founder of Tartabit LLC, an experienced technology development engineering executive with proven success in the IoT and Industry 4.0 market sectors. Jim has experience delivering solutions for many industries such as factory automation, telematics, healthcare, smart metering, condition-based monitoring, device management, and many more. Prior to Tartabit, Jim served as CTO of Telit, a leading provider of IoT hardware, software, and services. As Vice President of R&D at Telit, Jim designed and built the award-winning DeviceWise industrial IoT gateway software and the Telit IoT platform. Jim holds a Bachelor of Science in Computer Engineering from Purdue University. So those are four panelists that we have here today. And as I mentioned earlier, we'll start off with a brief overview of the slides about the company and so on forth, and we'll get to questions around panels right after that. So let me kick off telling you a little bit of strategy of things. We are an innovation consulting firm based in Silicon Valley and primarily work in 4 different areas. We do a lot of work with industry standards of development, working with various working groups like GCTC. We're also part of the CompTIA team. We do a lot of work in the intelligence and insight space, doing a lot of research in IoT. Some of the examples was what I mentioned earlier about the work that we're doing with Nist. A lot of the innovation consulting we do is around setting up innovation labs for smart cities like counties. And we also offer some services and solutions related to IoT. So on the next slide here, I put a few examples of some of the work that we're doing from a standards perspective. So I think I mentioned briefly about the GCTC effort that our company is involved with. GCTC, for those of you who are not aware of GCTC, GCT is a joint collaborative effort between public and private companies trying to address hot topic areas. So they have a variety of different areas like wireless superclusters, smart buildings, smart regions, and we are participating in several of these efforts. Our company is also part of CompTIA's IoT Industry Advisory Council, and we also participate with the IEEE Smart Cities Working Group. Some of the areas that we have done from a research and intelligence perspective is, I think I mentioned briefly about the municipal IoT blueprint, but we also published a few white papers around COVID and how to use IoT opportunities around COVID. We have a number of these white papers. For those who are interested, they're available on our website. In terms of research, we've also done some research around looking at smart city opportunities around 28 different cities. We looked at about 10 international cities and about 18 cities within the US to kind of identify top use cases and so on forth, and we synthesized some findings around that. And lastly, we've also contributed to a variety of books like Smart Cities for Dummies, and we've also been talking at various panel discussions to talk about our experience around IoT. From a consulting standpoint, we've had experience setting up innovation labs. We set up an innovation lab for County of San Mateo out here in Silicon Valley. For the last 3 to 4 years, we've been operating that, where we have a number of use cases like smart parking, air quality network, location analytics, a lot of the IoT use cases that you all are familiar with. And we've all struggled with similar kind of topics around, hey, what connectivity to use, what devices to use. Is this something that we can plan 5 years ahead and so on and forth? So we do a lot of work in the innovation consulting space. And in terms of services and solutions, we've been helping cities recently about how to deal with reopening efforts, how to use technology and so on and forth, both IoT and non-IoT, to help kind of figure out what data can we use to help them move forward. So those are some of the services and solutions that our company is working on. More interestingly, I wanted to talk about Nist study that we're doing. This is, I'm hoping, right, a number of you who are present today can potentially help participate in this effort. This is a 2-year study that we're working with the US government to understand what are some of the broad IoT infrastructure gaps that exist across 10 different industries. We kicked this study off last year. We're hoping to complete some of the analysis this year. For those of you who might be interested to participate in talking with us about your experience on IoT, we would love to talk to you. There's a link on this to submit a survey. If you have the bandwidth and time, we would appreciate taking an interview with you to kind of ask your input. So this is one really interesting project that many of you would be interested to participate, as well as I think you can drive value from this. So that's a little bit about strategy of things, my company, and what we're doing in the space of IoT. My contact information is here, and feel free to contact me about any of the things that I've spoken so far. With that, I would like to now hand over the next part of the presentation to Landon. Over to you, Landon.
Hey, thanks, Renil. And nice to be here this afternoon with everybody. Great introduction, really good discussion I think we'll be able to have with that setup on LPWA and that landscape as it goes between licensed and unlicensed. Just a little quick background on Core as I walk you here through a couple slides. Core, you probably know the company if you've been in this IoT space over the past decade or two. We've kind of been there since we used to call it telematics, and then through M2M, and now here we are with the IoT M2M Council, kind of bringing it all together. But what we help companies do and every day is help them get through the deployment, the management, and then the scaling of their business with IoT solutions. Our bread and butter, of course, is connectivity. We have relationships with pretty much every major carrier around the world, and we integrate those carrier relationships into one simple kind of scalable platform. We take that connectivity, and now we help our customers kind of build solutions that are tailored to their industries. I'll walk you through that in just a second. And then in addition to that, help them enhance that data that they're gathering from their IoT solutions through a set of robust analytics tools. We're kind of all over the country, customers all over the place, and have about 12 million devices under management with varying degrees of involvement. And again, we kind of have been able to bring a lot of the specialty of these networks that are coming to life into specific circumstances that help, verticalized businesses and solutions, enterprises, bring those products to market. So as we kind of look at this spectrum, we'll call it, pun intended there, we have a spectrum within the spectrum, right? I happen to be with one of these unlicensed companies called Ingenu as their chief marketing officer a couple of years ago. So again, doing the evaluation on the LoRa's, the Sigfoxes of the world, some of the Wi-Fi technologies, even some of the short-range technologies that use this unlicensed spectrum, it became very clear that that's not for everybody, but it is for a lot of use cases. And where it makes sense, it makes perfect sense. Within that, though, you start to see this kind of shared spectrum evolve. And I think the question was brought up on the past panel just now about CBRS, for example, and how that's a pathway maybe through to 5G through kind of this hybrid shared spectrum model. It's an interesting dynamic in that regulators are now looking at that kind of shared space as something that is a lot more flexible, I think, for dynamic applications or private LTE deployments or 5G kind of in a factory or industrial setting. And then, of course, on the far right, you have the license space. And again, we've talked a little bit about that already in this discussion, but the NB-IoT, Cat-M, and no longer do we just have, okay, here's your 2G or 3G rate plan with a SIM card, go out and deploy a point of sale device, or go out and connect the vehicle for a program like OnStar. That's really a thing of the past. So now when we look at kind of what the use cases are, what the data needs are, what the latency issues are, maybe what the cost parameters are with the use case, now we start to really understand, hey, there's a specific application or a specific connectivity application that applies to your vertically integrated application. And we haven't had that in the past from a connectivity standpoint. So this is kind of what we think, and our CEO, Rommel Bale at Core, talks about this decade of IoT. We think this next decade of which, the upcoming 10 years is going to be just a rocket ship for IoT, because now you have specific technologies that support specific use cases. So you don't have to fit kind of a specific cost parameter around something, or a specific technology that maybe doesn't have enough speed, or has too much speed, or has too much power consumption. You really have this whole spectrum within the spectrum, if you will. So, as we look at that kind of, as I've touched on this, that dynamic connectivity, we start to see these different drivers, I think, whether it's, an indoor application that might be connecting forklifts in a warehouse. Do you really need this super wide area network, or do you need kind of a private network? So now we can make those decisions, I think, because those technologies are available. The application is going to drive it as well, as I talked about. Mission criticality, uptime, high reliability. These things are going to be drivers in terms of decision around licensed, unlicensed, even this kind of shared license option. And then, of course, compatibility. This is something that's, really interesting, because, again, we know from, compatibility with bands and frequencies and antenna design, depending on where you deploy that solution. Of course, a lot of our customers, they're looking to take their solution not just to a region or a specific market, but they're looking to take it globally. So as they take it globally, they want simplicity in their supply chain. They want to have a single SKU potentially. They don't want to deal with 5, 6, 7 different modules. They want to have one single module that has a very similar antenna design, that has a very similar, level of band support. And so these decision drivers, I think, are really popping out as very prominent as we move forward in this kind of new age of connectivity. And then just last of all, what we do, as I mentioned earlier, we try to focus on these use cases in a very intimate way with our customers. So no longer, again, is this punch out SIM card mailed to somebody and they pop it in their device and off they go. Of course, that's still going to be a need for many kind of early stage proof of concepts and pilots and things like that, no doubt about it, and it makes up a big portion of our business. But as we look at very specific use cases and specific verticals like healthcare, especially with the pandemic this past year plus, we've seen use cases like that within the connected health space with companies that don't really think they're an IoT company or even a technology company. They're a healthcare company first. And so they come to us as really, give us advice. How do we navigate this? How do we choose the right network? How do we choose the right module? And they're coming to us a lot earlier in this game. And so these are the areas where we've developed competence around. Connected health, for example, we made this acquisition of Integron recently. I came from that background where we serve a lot of medical device companies in the world, life sciences companies. So we're able to take somebody through something like ISO certification or compliance with the FDA. And in addition to that, advise them on some of their connectivity choices. And again, at Core, we feel like this is kind of the way that companies need to think about it. Focus on the customer first, focus on the use case first, and let experts like the people on, on these panels that Keith and team put together, let them help you kind of be guided through the application development process. So I'll pass it back to you, Renil. Thank you.
Thank you, Landon. That was terrific. I would like to now pass on to Tom.
Morning, everybody, and thanks for taking the time today, and thanks to the IMC for inviting me and the fellow panelists who are presenting today. Really appreciate the opportunity. I thought I'd start by talking a little bit about Microsoft's perspective on where the industry is going, kind of maturing as we go along here, moving from kind of what we see today with connected assets that are being tracked, and moving towards this world where entire environments are modeled, where we're able to take the insights that we're getting from the physical world and really make that digital twin of the physical world and reason over it and produce really digital transformation projects. So we're seeing things like, stadiums and farms and environments, complete environments where these discrete sensors are no longer just being managed from a device management perspective, but are really being placed in the context of where they are, what they do, how they relate to each other, and enable us to really, move the needle across industries, everything from looking at the operations of a port and what's going in and out of the port to remote environments like monitoring forests or inside of a retail store, understanding what's aisle 1, what's aisle 2, where's the dwell time here, all this sort of stuff. This connected environments concept is sort of where we see the market going right now. And this is true across, a variety, like I said, of different vertical scenarios and physical environments. And with that, if you just kind of look at the diversity of environments that are being modeled out there, that you can see on this slide here, it's become apparent to us that the world of connectivity is something that we're really concerned with at Microsoft. And so our involvement in the ecosystem, working with the partners that are on this panel and beyond, working with the IMC and other organizations to make sure that it's easy for us and our ecosystem partners to model that world and to bring it into Azure. And that really means that we have a diversity of solutions so that you have the right tool for the right job. I think Fernando earlier did a great job of outlining those dimensions on which we make those decisions, across the power consumption, the distance that things go, the throughput that's required, the cost that's required. And like I said, Microsoft's been making a lot of investments in this area. There were some questions about CBRS and private networking and edge computing, all these kinds of things coming together. Microsoft's made big investments in this area with the acquisition of Affirmed and Metaswitch to be able to develop high-speed private 5G or CBRS networks on the edge, and then provide that backhaul over public networks. And I would say also that it's interesting when I think about the title of this panel, there's a versus in there, and there's been a lot of mentions about the diversity of networks, and certainly we see this both as more of an and than an or. So if you think about some use cases that we would see of like monitoring pumps in a remote environment for oil and gas, well, that's a great thing for a private network like LoRaWAN to be able to aggregate those local signals. But at the end of the day, they need to get to the cloud. So you're going to have a 5G backhaul. So you might have, LPWA or unlicensed technology, out on the edge, and then some processing using edge compute, and then backhaul, using 5G. Or you may flip that depending on if you're in a very remote mining area where you have a high-speed CBRS network that's doing all the local networking, enabling everything from your HoloLens to work to video analytics that are detecting anomalies, but maybe you've got limited backhaul there, so you're coming back over a licensed spectrum, that a technology like narrowband IoT or Cat-M to signal when something needs to actuate outside of that high-speed environment. So we certainly see this as a big diversity of choices, and fixing the right pieces together, depending on your use case, of course, is the challenge. And at Microsoft, we're trying to make sure we've got the right relationships with the right companies to make that easiest, so that people can focus on the digital transformation project. I mean, people are not connecting these devices just for the sake of connecting them. You need to get them into an environment where you can actually make sense out of them. I just thought I'd put together a little roadmap here of some of the areas, and again, places that we're investing heavily in, a little guide to some of the elements here, depending on those dimensions that Fernando mentioned earlier. But at the end of the day, whether you're coming in through any of these connectivity mechanisms, what we're trying to do at Microsoft is ensure that we have the stack above there to manage the device landscape, manage the health of those devices, monitor those devices, and pass that information up to, I don't know if anyone may have caught our Microsoft Build recordings or live sessions at Inspire recently, but Satya has come out and talked about this idea about a metaverse where you're really going beyond just ingesting and processing data, but really being able to predict, simulate, and use the advanced AI, machine learning, and analytics capabilities in Azure to really actuate. And of course, we believe at Microsoft that we're developing that full stack technology, not just the mapping from the physical world into IoT, but enabling you to build digital twins of that, be able to understand the geospatial location and relationships of that, whether there's indoor or outdoor, and map that and present that and understand how to get from one point to the other, how to get that data aggregated and analyzed using our AI technologies, and in fact actuated through things like our Power Platform and Dynamics investments that allow you to have that application layer kind of pre-built. So, we really feel like we've got the full stack of capabilities all the way up through the interactions of using Power Platform and HoloLens and other tools on top of these networks. And again, thanks to the IMC and to the panelists and to the attendees for tuning in today.
Thank you, Tom. It's always exciting to hear what Microsoft is doing. So very exciting stuff here. Over to you, Marco.
Yeah. Thanks, Raniel, for the introduction, and hi, everyone. Glad to be here today. Very interesting session so far. So let me start, for those of you who don't know Telit, to tell you something about the company. Telit is a pioneer in the Internet of Things business since more than 20 years, ever since the acronym IoT had not even been invented yet. It was called machine-to-machine, M2M back in the days. So our mission is to deliver innovative technology to connect and manage practically anything, any object. With that in mind, we provide end-to-end solutions that are made of three main pillars. The hardware, that is the wireless communication module. Think of an LTE or 5G modem. The second pillar is the cellular connectivity, that is the SIM card and the cellular data plan. And the third pillar is the cloud platform, like our device management IoT platform. So you can use our modules, connectivity, and platform bundled together as an integrated end-to-end solution. And this helps to reduce complexity, risk, time to market, and cost versus trying to engineer your own grown projects. This is what we call Telit One Edge, and this is really where Telit is unique in the market, because we can help you putting together all the building blocks, all the pieces of the puzzle that are required to get your devices connected from the field to your business application. We call it the first mile of the IoT, from the carb to the cloud. And we believe this is the most challenging part of an IoT deployment. So here is where we really want to make your life easier. Now, let's dive into today's topic of discussion, licensed versus unlicensed. First off, is that really the question? Because the question is more, I think, the use case and the top needs. So it's not much about one technology being better than the other. It's about what makes sense for your use case. In fact, some unlicensed technologies offer an attractive alternative for business models that, for example, don't require global coverage or don't need to handle mission-critical data. Deploying an unlicensed private network by either the company itself or by a system integrator could be a cost-effective solution to meet specific requirements and provide more control over the network. On the other hand, it is difficult and costly to scale up and replicate this approach globally. So again, your use case becomes a critical factor. Now let's look at one by one at the main KPIs of a typical IoT application. And Fernando did a really great job in the keynote mentioning most of these dimensions. So let's just quickly recap some of them. So first dimension is location, which means, for example, do you need coverage in remote areas? Then LPWA, unlicensed, needs fewer base stations than cellular. So it can be more viable to deploy in a remote location. However, if you need to deploy your devices in multiple countries, say globally, then it's difficult to get this global coverage with an unlicensed technology. Second KPI is security. So we all know cellular technologies are continuously upgraded to support state-of-the-art security techniques for authentication, for encryption, and they rely on a hardware secure element, which is the SIM. So they are designed since many years to handle sensitive data. Quality of service, very important. So there are multiple ways to guarantee a certain quality of service over a cellular network. On the other hand, unlicensed technologies, they use frequencies that are not reserved and so might suffer from some degraded quality of service due to channel interference from other services. Also, those unlicensed frequencies are not harmonized globally. Let me say there must be a good reason if MNOs all over the world spend billions of euros, dollars to acquire spectrum. That has a value. Next KPI is scalability. I kind of mentioned it already. So if your goal is to scale globally, then cellular would be the wiser option. Because global coverage with longevity is just easier and more cost-effective in the long run, since the networks are already there, are established, and won't require new construction. Asset value, or let me call it maybe business value. So with unlicensed technology, you have a very good solution for an ad hoc deployment, a specific deployment in a specific area. But if you want to expand your business, then again, we are talking about the ability to massively scale up, and that's more problematic. Last but not least, data frequency. Unlicensed technologies usually have some duty cycle and airtime restrictions, so how long you can be transmitting over the communication channel. So I think they are a very good fit for seldom transmissions with a limited number of messages that can be transmitted per day. But if you need frequent exchanges of data with the network, then maybe cellular is a better option. So I'll stop here for the moment. I just want to encourage you to try and find out Telit's solution. Our mission is, again, to make your life easier when you are approaching all the different IoT options. So feel free to visit our website and get started. And with this, back to you, Ranil, and looking forward to the Q&A.
Thank you, Marco. Those are some good aspects that you discussed. Over to you now, Jim.
Thank you very much. So hi guys, Jim Ward here from Tartabit. We created a next generation LPWAN enterprise integration framework. So, what does this all mean? We saw a problem in the market that everybody out there is now trying to build an IoT platform. And at the end of the day, customers are building their business solutions in the hyperscale clouds. And so having this kind of thick platform in the middle, really in the long run is not going to be sustainable. And so we decided to focus on really what I'll call a bridging technology. We are a data in transit platform that focuses on integrating LPWAN data from LTE Cat-M, narrowband IoT devices, Sigfox, LoRa, satellite, Wi-Fi. Generally, if it's in that kind of low bandwidth category, it meets our criteria, and we integrate that specifically with the services from Microsoft Azure IoT. And this was our decision to focus on what we saw as kind of the leading cloud platform in this space, to really enable customers to build world-class low-powered solutions on top of the Microsoft platform. So, how do we position ourselves? We're the easiest to use, easiest to buy, easiest to deploy LPWAN cloud gateway service, allowing next-generation devices to integrate with Microsoft Azure IoT. So when we look at this is the problem in LPWAN and in licensed versus unlicensed, this entire discussion is about making sure you're using the right tool for the right job. There are many standards out there. There are many technologies. You really need to know what your own use case is and what the right way is to solve it. If we look, say, at the emerging, probably my favorite standard that I'm pushing hard to be more broadly adopted is lightweight M2M. Brings a lot of device management, data reporting, information modeling capabilities to low-power devices. It's a great technology. It has no place in remote video use cases where you're trying to monitor an intelligent camera at the edge. So you need to use the right tool for the right job. And we try to provide that toolbox to help these customers with low-powered devices, whether it be new or old, get into the enterprise systems. So if we look kind of at the continuum, and here I focused on kind of on the bandwidth continuum, but there's a power consumption continuum. There are many of these different ways to look at the problem. But when you're looking at cloud integration, if you're in the higher category LTE space, if you're connected on Wi-Fi or Ethernet, if you're plugged into the wall, the hyperscale cloud guys provide excellent APIs and SDKs to be able to manage your device, collect the data from the device, get it into their ecosystems, and run with it. They all fall short when you start looking at technologies across LoRa, Sigfox, satellite, narrowband IoT, LTE Cat-M. We did an experiment modeling a very simple asset tracking use case using, let's say, several of the hyperscale cloud SDKs. And let's say it used about 5 megabytes of data per month to do something that using a more optimized LPWAN protocol uses 500K per month. And in this world today where everybody thinks about their cell phones, they say, oh, 5 megs doesn't sound like a lot. It's a big deal when you talk about having 100,000 connected assets. It can be the difference between a viable business case and something that just doesn't scale. And so this is where we fit in. We come in this LPWAN space. We have connectors for lightweight M2M. We consume CoAP. We consume MQTT in customers' proprietary payloads. We have custom UDP and TCP decoders. We use in our low-code approach to be able to process that data and push it into the Azure ecosystem. So, when talking about, licensed and unlicensed, I threw one slide together to try to frame up my thoughts. There is no right answer. Neither one is better than the other. There are reasons that you might choose one or the other, and this is where you really need to understand your use case to know what makes sense. So, licensed technology has access to better data transfer. The unlicensed technologies today are great for remote sensor opportunities, but they have significant limits when you try to do something, again, like a video processing application or something requiring more data. There's better roaming in the licensed technology. There's a lot coming. There's immense work going on right now within the LoRa ecosystem to try to enable roaming between LoRa networks. I would describe it as a work in progress, but we all have hopes that it could turn into something extremely powerful one day. In the license space, you generally can use a more less parts to build a global solution, and you generally have higher powered, more capable modules. So, the modules from people like companies like Telit have a very high amount of functionality compared to the modules that are available in the LPWAN space. On the unlicensed side, you can get significantly better battery performance. If you're delivering a national solution or a regional solution or a campus solution, it is perfectly viable in many geographies to be able to deploy these solutions and have ownership of the data in the networks. And right now, the unlicensed technology is available at, let's say, a lower cost than you can get LTE technologies today. So that's my my quick in a nutshell, because I'm summary of what Tartabit is. I'm excited to get to the Q&A.
Thank you, Jim. Fantastic. So, folks, there was some great material that was discussed over the last 20 minutes, 30 minutes. Let's jump into some questions for the audience. I want to start off first with a very simple question. We have a lot of folks here. Some of them are familiar with IoT. Some of them are already doing perhaps various projects within the scope of IoT. But just to kind of frame it for those people who are not super familiar, why is the topic of licensed versus unlicensed so important when it comes to thinking about IoT solutions? And I would like to hear each of the panelists' perspective on this. Maybe start with you, Landon.
Yeah, I mean, it's a debate, I think, that's been going on for a few years, right? And it's one that's going to continue for a while. I think in the beginning of this shift or spread from just one generic network to many networks that do a lot of different things, the standards bodies kind of stepped in and accelerated some of the time frames with things like the development of, CAT-M and NB-IoT networks and other licensed networks. And I think at the time that kind of naturally created this debate between licensed and unlicensed. And so kind of as we fast forward to today and answering that question, as everybody else on this panel kind of already stated in their presentations, right, that this isn't necessarily a question of one versus the other, but what fits best for, your use case in the end, right? Is it a remote sensor that doesn't have the coverage that would be covered by something like a licensed network, or doesn't have the power capabilities that come into that device or sensor from a fixed source? These are the questions, rather than maybe which one is better or which one is, superior, inferior, whatever it might be.
Thank you. Tom?
Yeah, I mean, I have to echo what Landon's saying about, the diversity of things. And I think also what Jim mentioned about the right tool for the right job. Sometimes there's really not much of a choice. I mean, if you're out in the middle of nowhere, right, or you're in the middle of the ocean, then, you can use satellite, or you can use some sort of maybe a local LPWA, LoRaWAN or Sigfox environment, on a ship. If you're in an oil field, you've got limited choices. So sometimes the geography of the situation is dictating, and the use case is dictating it. I think the important thing is, as you consider the options, to experiment, but then think about how this looks when your project is mature. Because what we do see is cost considerations, or that ROI analysis that you're doing people will do a proof of concept and get something working without really considering what the cost and what the management, what the people you need. How are you going to make sure that if you're in the unlicensed space and you don't have a CSP looking out for you, are you going to turn to a company that is going to take care of that for you, right? Either in a local environment, or I noticed I saw my friend Gabriel from Everynet on the call today. Unlicensed doesn't mean necessarily unmanaged. I think Ranil, you mentioned earlier, there are managed solutions where there's no CapEx outlay for getting into the space there. So, there's lots of options. What I would say is experimentation is great, but look at the long-term costs of maintaining things and doing them at scale as you kind of make the decisions for connectivity landscape.
Awesome. Marco?
Yeah, so I think we have already discussed deeply the importance of matching the right technology with your use case in terms of technical evaluation. What I would like to add is that licensed versus unlicensed is also a business choice. Because on one end, you choose to rely on a standard global technology that is backed by the widest industry community. On the other end, you are more like putting all your eggs in one basket, adopting a technology that is either proprietary or linked to a limited vendor ecosystem. So I think these strategic business aspects are as important as the technical ones when you want to decide between taking one path or the other. And I also like very much what Tom said about thinking big since the beginning. So you don't want to limit yourself just to the current business opportunity. You need to think in advance. Where are you going to expand your business? How much are you going to scale up your business, hopefully? And so choose a technology that won't limit you to scale up.
And finally to you, Jim.
Thanks. I think the salient points have been made by my compatriots here. So, I'll sum it up by saying it's all about understanding your use case, your requirements, and using the technology that meets those needs. If that path leads you down a licensed or unlicensed path, there should be no fear about going either way. Both are technologies that are here to stay. They're here for the long run. You really you can't go wrong selecting either one as long as it's going to meet your business needs.
Fantastic.
Back to you.
So one aspect that I wanted to ask the panelists is, at what stage of the planning process should you be considering thinking about this? Because in some cases, your project is perhaps a 1 year, 2 year time frame, and you're looking at operating for maybe a 10-year time period. When do you start thinking about which of these options are good for you? And is there an opportunity for you to switch over to something else as you progress? How should someone who's trying to come up with a new product or trying to think of prototyping a solution start thinking about some of these options? This is a question for you, Landon.
Yeah, I mean, that's a tough one, right? Because the deeper you go, the longer you go into a specific down a specific technology path, the more expensive it is to change that path, right? So I think it's imperative that you get it right early, but at the same time, you do need to figure out what's best for you for that use case. But again, if you're swapping out devices and sensors and modules a year down the road, it blows up a lot of these business cases that you're talking about. If you're in this debate of licensed versus unlicensed, your cost parameters are probably pretty sensitive. So to say, okay, that didn't work, let's go with CAT-M versus NB-IoT this time, roll out the trucks, it probably just in that moment destroys your business case. And so I would say get it right the first time, right? But if you don't, get it right soon. You know, and I think there's plenty of really good experience here on the panel and throughout the industry with what Keith has brought together with the IMC, where you do have kind of a lot of scars to share, right? You have a lot of experience where you could come back and say, hey, Marco at Telit, like walk me through, you know, module selection up front and tell me about some stories about my use case that have succeeded or failed. So I would just say do a lot of homework and due diligence up front, because the costs on the back end and the further you go down the path of, you know, piloting things out for prolonged periods of time, all it does is add cost, I think, on the back end of things. And like I say, with these use cases, if you're having this discussion, these use cases probably don't have high revenue per unit anyway. So it's pretty imperative you get it right soon.
Great. Any other observations from the other panelists?
Renil, I think talking about at what stage you should be thinking about licensed or unlicensed, I would say definitely at the very beginning, because from all the answers of the other panelists, we have understood that there are implications in the long term of your project if you select one type of technology or the other. So I really encourage everyone to make this due diligence, as Landon was saying, at the very beginning of the project, because this will help avoiding bad surprises later in the project when it's more difficult to fix things.
I'm going to pick up some questions from the audience, as we've been getting some really interesting questions. So one of the questions that came in is, in unlicensed connectivity, what is really missing from mass adoption? So there's LoRa, Sigfox, some of these connectivity options. There are different stages in different countries in terms of adoption. What is really stopping them from super mass adoption? One of the panelists for you.
I mean, I can jump in there again. Renil, hate to steal the mic again, but I think real quick, my 2 points here would be, one, I think the underlying network hasn't been there yet, right? You know, you do have kind of these private, when you're talking about unlicensed, you have these kind of regional based networks. I think a couple things that have been brought up, EveryNet's a great example of this, deploying a nationwide network. Once you have that kind of backbone of a network connectivity standard that you can build upon, I think, you know, there's really some interesting things with LoRa happening. I mentioned EveryNet. Helium's done some really creative things to kind of build a network inexpensively and quickly. Once you kind of have that groundwork laid, I think that will accelerate things, and cost is the second parameter, right? So as that ecosystem matures and scales, costs of hardware, cost of modules, cost of deployment hopefully comes down. And those are the two things that from my perspective, that are really going to drive us on an upward trend there.
Yeah, I'd second that. I think that the ability to have a global, you know, roaming asset right now is kind of limited to the licensed world, where the roaming, you know, infrastructure has been established. And we see a lot of good momentum for private environments. I mean, if you can cover a whole building and have a smart building with 1 or 2 LoRaWAN gateways, that's a great solution for now. But if you don't want to incur the management of those antennas and the overhead, the CapEx outlays that you have at the beginning of the project, some of the companies that Landon mentioned, like EveryNet or Helium or Lacuna, you know, are bringing that into reality. And regionally, those things are mature and looking good. But I think once we get higher rate of coverage there, we'll see some interesting developments.
Awesome. Another question that's come in from the audience is, what are some of the privacy considerations we're thinking about in the non-licensed space? Is that something that one should be concerned about as you're designing your solutions? And what are some of the mitigation steps there? Perhaps, Jim, maybe you can start answering that for us.
Yeah, so it's a question that I would say it equally applies to the license space as well. So, one of the biggest requirements customers need to think about is the security and the needs for their use case. Are you doing simple monitoring? Are you doing remote control and actuation use case? Whether are you transmitting any PII or data that would run afoul of any of the emerging privacy laws? And so when you look in the unlicensed space, definitely there are positive options if you are running your own private network. If you are running over one of the public networks, it gets a little bit more challenging because, let's say, it's not yet common to be encrypting the traffic within the LoRa payloads. But when I look at LTE, Cat-M, and narrowband solutions, I'd say most of the popular telematics devices today do not provide any encryption technology. They rely on customers to deploy private APNs from the cellular operators or the MVNOs as their only line of defense, and that has been proven to be problematic in the license space as well. So I think all of the industries need to do a lot of work to improve the security tools and options for privacy from the device all the way up to the application.
Excellent. Another question from the audience again here is, are carriers or telcos supporting mostly LTE-M and NB-IoT and not LoRa? Maybe Ltem, you can answer that.
Yeah, for sure. I think their inherent networks, right, are supportive of these kind of 3GPP-based licensed networks, and so for sure, carriers are supportive of course, LTE-M because it's really an extension of their LTE footprint in a lot of cases. So it just economically makes sense to do that. It's a great technology as well, and has some capabilities that bring higher bandwidth to an LPWA conversation. And so yeah, they're absolutely backing these LTE-M, NB-IoT type technologies because their infrastructure supports it, because the cost basis to deploy those networks is likely less than it would be for a LoRa Sigfox type network, generally speaking. Again, I'm not an expert on the economics of that, but generally speaking, that's the case. So yeah, but I think you're going to start to see carriers, and you've seen a couple, I think, throughout the world, go to somewhat of a hybrid model where, again, it makes sense to do, a degree of a LoRa deployment or a Sigfox deployment or partnership. Again, we see this with some of these LPWA players and tower companies, for example. And I saw a little question here in the panel as well. I'll just address it real quick. Why Ingenu failed, right? And that was because I think Ingenu tried to build this network on their own, pay the tower rents, not do any cost sharing. And it's really expensive to build and own and operate nationwide, let alone a global network, right? So that economic factor, I think, is a key driver in terms of which networks get built by whom and how, right?
Excellent. This is a question from Mark. Yep, sorry, go ahead.
No, I just wanted to add something to the previous question. So I think what is interesting is also that at the beginning of LTM and narrowband IoT, we were wondering which one technology would have won the race for LPWA, cellular LPWA. And what we are seeing nowadays is that actually most of the major operators around the world, with few exceptions, are deploying both the technology in their networks. So I think the good news for the industry is that there will not be countries with one technology and countries with another technology, but at the end of the day, most of the countries will have networks supporting both of them. So this will give that global footprint that for many businesses is paramount.
Got it. Marco, another question for you is, so there's a lot of evolution in terms of stability and improvements in the licensed spectrum. We don't see that much of improvements in the non-licensed spectrum. What does that mean, and how should folks think about that aspect as they're planning out their options?
Well, I think this is the beauty of a standard, right? And that's why at Telit we are big supporters of standard technology. Standards are improved every year to include new exciting features, but at the same time they are long-term. So just think about the fact that if we talk about cellular technologies, we have seen a new generation of cellular standards every 10 years, more or less. But if you think about 2G, that was first deployed in 1991, it's still around in many parts of the world after 30 years. So, and it's the same is going to happen with 4G LTE, which was first introduced in 2010 and is expected to be available for at least another 10 years or so. So I think when it's about standards, you get both the longevity and the continuous improvement, because there is a wide industry community joining efforts to continuously add new features, add improved capabilities to the standard.
Thank you. Would any of the other panelists want to add on to that? Standards, how much standards would impact licensed versus unlicensed?
I mean, I think it's a little bit like there's incremental improvements in all the major technologies that we're talking about. Sigfox, I see Emma mentioning the global roaming capabilities, and I think somebody mentioned earlier about LoRaWAN looking at more location services, more capability to interchange between LoRaWAN networks. So I think they evolve in different ways, perhaps, but and standards aren't limited to license, right? I mean, these other technologies are standards, and LoRaWAN has a standards body to guide its development. So I think we see innovation across all of these things. And if you look at sort of the analysts' projections ahead and chipset forecasts, I think all of these and the unique radio characteristics of the different technologies, I think we see a lot of potential growth across all of these in the future. So
I'll chime in with a slightly different take on standards. So, I think when we talk standards around licensed versus unlicensed, we get focused on kind of the FiMax standards. Oh, is it going to be LTE? Okay, we know what that means. Is it going to be LoRa? But you go up a couple of levels, and again, I'll circle back to my favorite device management standard right now of lightweight M2M, and it's trying to make big inroads into managing LoRaWAN and Sigfox devices, and that type of interoperability will make managing these kind of disparate fleets of devices much easier. Right now, there's a huge integration effort required, regardless of technology, to integrate different devices and different sensors. And so all the work on the top to unify them is a great thing. And I'll give a plug for Tom. All the work that Microsoft has done with the Azure PnP framework and the DTDL models has really also helping now get these devices kind of visible and organized in the enterprise applications that people are trying to use to, again, further accelerate the adoption and deployment of these IoT solutions.
Excellent.
I think that's interesting, Tim, because I mean, from our perspective, the important piece, is that when you get to sitting down and writing your cloud application to control and actuate the environment, to understand what's going on there, you don't want to have to think, hey, about the connectivity transport. You don't want to have to think about that. So that's where, technologies like what Tartabit is providing, and in general, our plug and play and DTDL investments are all about is like, at this level of cloud development, let's abstract those details and give a common programming model, a common interaction model, a common set of services and applications and SaaS elements that you can build upon without worrying about the details. So thankful to have that diversity of ecosystem players that kind of normalize that to the sort of standards that we're setting with plug and play and DTDL, so that everything kind of looks the same, underneath the covers.
Here's another question for you guys. So we often talk about using maybe one kind of LPWAN technology or one kind of connectivity technology for a specific use case. What are some examples where maybe multiple options are needed or are used where without using multiple options, that use case may not fully derive the value that you're looking for? Have you guys seen any such use cases in the industry where that's inherently happening? And is there a trend where you might need to have multiple options versus relying on just one option?
Yeah, I can something comes to mind real quick. Like when you're deploying assets into people's homes and you ask them, to put in your SSID, blah, 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 to get connected to their Wi-Fi, that can give you a great option to have high bandwidth telematics, kind of, understand what's going on in that environment. But having a fallback to narrowband IoT, so you can at least say something in the case that they either didn't take the time or the network changed, that's an area where we see multiples in. And then I think I mentioned earlier some of those scenarios where really you're doing unlicensed on the edge and then licensed backhaul to the cloud. Those are a couple instances we see, like the oil field scenario, or like I know managing a port or an environment like that, where you're really doing a private network on the premises of the environment, and then you're combining that with a public network backhaul.
Yeah, I was going to add that exact example, Tom. I think you touched on it perfectly. We see that use case quite often, actually, where think of that port or warehouse running a LoRa network, right, set up and structured and run by whatever organization it is. But when those pallets leave on the trucks and need to be tracked throughout the supply chain, that LoRa network stays put, right? That's not going with you. So typically. And so, yeah, those kind of dual mode connectivity methods that you put maybe a Cat-M or even an LTE connection on a device with a LoRa device, we see that, we're starting to see that quite a bit more frequently.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say you can categorize them into kind of two categories. Some use cases use multiple radios to optimize for cost of the transport or cost on power, and some use multiple transports out of necessity for coverage. So whether it's a satellite with cellular backup, cellular with satellite backup, LoRa with cellular backup, all the different permutations there come into play. But those are kind of the two big considerations. Are you going to have coverage, or are you trying to somehow optimize your cost of the service?
And Jim, that's a good. I love that characterization of those two camps. And we haven't even really talked about the fact that really BLE on the edge as an unlicensed transport to an edge aggregator, and then back to the cloud is a really common thing that we're seeing with the characteristics of BLE in an indoor environment to aggregate sensors locally and transport that back. So not just Sigfox, not just LoRaWAN, but other near field technologies as well.
This is a question for you, Jim. I think as you were presenting to us your slides, you mentioned a little bit about high bandwidth use cases like video. So what are the two options for those who are trying to do a lot of video-based IoT use cases, and to what extent can they use unlicensed, if any at all?
Well, okay. So first, I'd probably say predominantly, I believe the statistics will show that most video use cases backhaul on Wi-Fi. There are some interesting applications for 5G for video backhaul. One of the things that I've been seeing now, and one of the great tools coming now is as we get more AI and processing power at the edge, we're seeing more video solutions get deployed that don't actually require streaming the video back home if you're trying to use. So in those cases, there are some limited opportunities to use unlicensed technology, like the LoRa's and Sigfoxes, but I'd say it's at this point, it's still extremely limited. What I would say is probably the emerging interesting use case in a lot of kind of the connected factory, connected ag use cases is backhauling over private LTE and looking at CBRS-based solutions to try to, again, skirt around the potential connectivity costs of backhauling gigabytes of data per high-def camera that you might have deployed around a facility or a farm or whatever the site may be. So I think with video, it's currently Wi-Fi with some emerging LTE and 5G, but I think CBRS and private LTE are going to be the most interesting alternatives for that space.
Excellent.
I just plus one on that, the edge component of video processing. We have a live video analytics running on the edge. There's lots of scenarios where you don't even want, you may not even be able to. If you're counting the people in a room, you can deploy an edge module onto a smart camera or onto if you've seen our Percept devices, which are our new intelligent edge AI devices, which can, perform that right within the camera or on a local brain box that is doing the video processing. You might not ever send those frames back. In fact, it might be that there's PII concerns about sending them back, and you only want to say, hey, there's 7 people in this room, or this machine is broken, or a car arrived that needs to be, serviced in some way, rather than ever sending the full stream back. We see a lot of this, worker safety scenarios, monitoring production lines, all this kind of stuff. So, those two things from our perspective, the live video analytics, again, and Percept. If you're into intelligent edge video processing, take a look for those or reach out to me on LinkedIn. Happy to provide some more detail about that.
Another topic I wanted to discuss was, when we talk about LPWAN technologies and connectivity options, it seems to be a lot more smoother when you're operating in an open environment. But what happens if you're in an urban environment where you have a lot of buildings, towers? What are the opportunities and options to consider about using licensed versus unlicensed in buildings?
Yeah, I'll jump in there, and that's where I think the diversity of these networks really comes into play from a value standpoint, right? When you start to talk about some of the 5G technologies, right? Millimeter wave and sub-6 and the different frequencies that some of these technologies run on, from 900 up to 2.4 and other places, right? It really comes down to, I guess doing the right footwork and groundwork in terms of knowing what that environment's like, how, you dealing with concrete walls, or are you dealing with, chain link fences, right? It's going to be really dynamic, and that's the beauty of the choices we have at play now. We didn't have these 5 years ago, right? We didn't have the option to, if a signal didn't get through a building, we just put up another repeater and spent the money on that infrastructure. Now we can actually choose technologies that fit the circumstance, and so I think that's kind of a generic answer, but that is the truth. BLE's at play there as well. Some of, like Tom said, the edge compute capabilities we have, we don't necessarily need a killer 5G signal all the time. We can do a lot of that groundwork and just send alerts and bits of data if that's the use case.
Yeah, in buildings, lots of times you see the scenario where, you've got the owner and then you've got the tenants, and the owner wants to manage the premises and even, provide that kind of limited view for the tenants. So, using the individual networks that are in there in the tenant space, it really doesn't go. So, if you've got 20 stories on a building, you can put a couple of gateways in there using Sigfox or using LoRaWAN and cover the whole thing. It's a great option, but so it kind of matters also. Is it your building? Is it split up? Some of the and like you said, the physical characteristics of the walls, and are you underground and all those kind of things.
I can add to that when we are talking about urban environment or even indoor use cases, I think the good thing is that all the technologies, licensed and unlicensed, are developing also positioning solutions that are not based on satellite necessarily. So cellular technology has multiple protocol for indoor positioning. There is good synergy also with other technologies like Wi-Fi, for example. There are more and more cellular modules today that can support also Wi-Fi sniffing, so can use the Wi-Fi access point to get a position even without the GPS. And LoRa as well, they have positioning solution. So I think all technologies are improving a lot in this sense, and this is exactly to work properly also in tough urban scenarios or even indoor.
Awesome. The next question I have is, what are the options you should consider when you're looking at mission-critical IoT applications? So is licensed connectivity spec the best option? And if yes, how do you kind of prioritize which of those options are best for mission-critical type of use cases? And if you have any examples from your experience, please share that too.
I can take a stab at it. So I think yes. I think licensed cellular technologies are the right fit when it comes to mission critical IoT applications. They are designed for security, and today you have also another option. So it's not only about cellular technology, but you can also deploy a cellular private network. So this improves even more the security and the privacy because you have full control of the network. So you can decide that the data stay on site; they don't go to the public network. You can manage the access to the network. So what devices are able to access the network. And so this is really, I think, this union of cellular technology and private network, it's really powerful. And you asked about use cases, examples. So we are seeing this a lot in the utilities space. So utilities are a mission critical service. And more they are looking into cellular technology to connect their energy grids and also their endpoints like the smart meters. But ideally, they would like to have cellular technology in a private environment. So we are talking again about private LTE networks because they don't only get the advantage of cellular technology, but also the advantages of a closed environment that they fully control.
I think we're really excited about the potential for CBRS and private LTE. Again, with our acquisition of Metaswitch and Affirmed, that gives us a great footprint, and especially for remote environments or high intensity inside of a factory, or when the challenging RF environments, being able to have a private 5G network that's completely under your control and has slicing and all the capabilities of that, is a great asset in the toolbox that I think is going to emerge over the next few years as a critical piece of the puzzle for those kinds of scenarios. It's like there's this big jump off point between IoT projects that are in a constrained area and IoT projects that are modeling assets that can be deployed anywhere in the world. And, obviously the private 5G is kind of really in that first camp, but I think we'll see a lot of growth in that, for campus environment, for a stadium, for a port, for a mine, those kinds of environments in the next upcoming years.
What is the
and that goes also to that idea, and I really like the way you had it landed in your slide, of shared, right? Because it's shared, it's private for you at the time, so you get a little bit of the advantage of both with those emerging technologies like CBRS.
What is the cost implication for setting up a private network or a CBRS type network? Is that a significant cost? Is that something that you want to consider only if you have some very specific types of use cases? What are some of those elements or attributes to think about when you're trying to deploy a private network or a CBRS type of network?
Yeah, I mean, I can kind of take that at a generic level, right? I mean, it's costly, right? You're paying for like high grade cellular infrastructure, right? If you're talking about a private LTE, private 5G network. But again, the way that regulators have set this up in most parts of the world is such that, the ongoing costs of running that network, aren't extraordinary either, right? But yeah, these are pretty complex, pieces of hardware, and it's not as, it's not super complex, but it's not as simple as, going to Best Buy and buying a Wi-Fi router and plugging it in your wall, right? It's a little more than that. And again, I think as companies get more innovative with these solutions, that cost and the complexity is going to come down a little bit. Yeah, I mean, you need, this isn't, a private 5G or LTE network isn't for every use case by any stretch, right?
Yeah, and the cost doesn't end after you bought the radios and stuck them in, right? Because you really got to think about who is managing the health of that network, and whether you're working with, a lot of the telcos are in there providing those management services, or even allocating their spectrum as a part of the project. But the ongoing cost of, it's all built into your cellular plan, right? When you're using a CSP, so really being aware of the ongoing costs after day one, I think, is an important part of considering private 5G or even a private, LoRaWAN or Sigfox networks.
Just one more comment. So I think when we talk about private cellular, private 5G especially, there are different levels that you can choose. So there is the fully private network, and that is for sure the most costly scenario. It gives you all the advantages, so it's a premium offer, but it has a big cost, as Landon and Tom said. Then there is also a sort of hybrid option where you are not deploying from scratch the full private network, but you are leveraging some other offering from the service providers. Like, for example, they can offer you a slice of their network, so you don't have a physical private network and you don't need to build and pay for it, but you get a slice of the existing network. So it's more a virtual private network, but still gives some of the advantages of having a controlled, a dedicated network rather than being on the public network with all the other users.
Guys, I think we're getting close to our time here. So before we wrap up, I just wanted to give each of you maybe a quick 30 seconds on any closing thoughts that you might want to share with the audience, from your perspective on this topic, what you would like them to walk away with. Maybe start with you, Landon.
Yeah, you bet. I think, again, the thing I'd want people to walk away from this conversation about is there's a lot of resources out there. There's a lot of knowledge. Just here on this panel, you have, the Microsoft, Telit, Tartabit, these guys all know what they're doing, right? So as you make these considerations, focus on your customer, focus on your vertical. Don't get in the weeds with technology and this and that. We find the companies that focus most on their use case, they focus most on the application, the value of that data, are the ones that, that really succeed in the market. Again, the technology is there. It'll support your use case, and there's people that can help guide you through it. I would say feel free to reach out to those people, use them as a resource, focus on your customer, right? This debate of licensed versus unlicensed will go on for many more years to come, I'm sure, and more variations of these networks will come out and models of deployment. But again, you're doing this for a customer base or for your employee base or whatever it is. So I would just recommend people focus on those rather than the technology.
Thank you. Tom?
Yeah, thanks everyone for tuning in today. There's a lot of exciting projects out there. So feel lucky to get to see the interesting sort of outcomes, after people go through all these decisions and get their application deployed to see what they are. Our mission at Microsoft is to make sure that solution builders have the right tool set and the right set of ecosystem partners to make that as easy as possible in today's technology environment. If you're running into problems or whatever, feel free to reach out on LinkedIn, probably the best way to get in touch with me. We're looking at this space closely and again, making sure that whether you choose licensed or Sigfox or LoRaWAN or narrowband or any of these technologies, that you're able to be successful in your ultimate mission, which is getting those devices under your control so that you can write great applications and go out there and build your digital transformation projects. So good luck. Thanks for the time. Appreciate the opportunity to be with you today.
Thank you. Marco?
Yeah, thanks guys. You made it easy for me because you said it all. I'm pretty much aligned with Landon and Tom. So I think two important messages. Talk to a trusted advisor to help you really find the right solution for your application, for your use case. And second is IoT is really growing exponentially. IoT is very diverse because there are tens, hundreds of different applications with different requirements. So there's probably no one solution that can fit all of them. But the good thing is there are a lot of solutions out there. So you'll for sure find the right one for your use case and your business. And want to thank again everybody, the panelists, the moderator, IMC, and all the people that listen in today.
Thank you, Marco. And Jim, finally to you.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Ranil. Thanks to my panelists with me here. Thanks to everybody for joining. My takeaway I'd like to leave you with is know your use case, know what you're trying to do, how you measure success in your deployment, and work with experts who know the technology and know this space. There are a lot of nuances, and for every successful IoT project, there's two that have failed. So now the great thing is that there is a very robust industry of people who know what's going on, know how to help guide you through picking the right technology. I don't look at this as licensed versus unlicensed. I look at this as a IoT industry of licensed and unlicensed. It's a combination. For some of you, you'll use both. Most of you will select one, and I hope you make the right choice. So I hope everybody has a great day, and thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Jim. Landon, Tom, Marco, Jim, thank you so much for your time. This was super exciting. We had some fantastic discussion. For the audience out there, I just wanted to highlight that thank you so much for your time, for participating in this. We do have another session that is going to kick off right now. As you can see on the screen, it's on advantages of universal hardware agnostic IoT solutions. So please definitely feel free to jump onto that session. You can click on the link here and get directly jump into there. Otherwise, thank you so much. Have a wonderful rest of the day. And thank you all for participating in the session. Goodbye.
Bye-bye. Thanks.
Thanks.
Thanks. Have a nice day.